Hey everybody, according to the software it says I am live and you should be able to hear me because I tested my microphone before we got here. Okay everybody, I see a lot of early birds out there. Let's see, we have hi to Inez, Melody, Lucinda, Mary, Trudy, I hope I'm not butchering anybody's name, Christine, Veronica, the Night Owl 669, hi. Barbara, Robin, I see lots of people out there already. If you have not subscribed to the channel and you are new for the first time, please hit the subscribe button, and anytime that you see something pop up, go ahead and hit that notification bell. That way you can see the things that are on the community tab. You can see all of the extra links I put on the website, and you can also see them on YouTube when I post them out there. All right, everybody, welcome. Say hello to each other. Tell us where you're from. I'm from Kentucky. Well, I'm currently living in Kentucky, but I grew up in Southern California, and this is allergy season in the Midwest. So we get cold days and warm days and lots of blooming trees. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be making the beautiful little shooting star. It's a brain break from all of the other stars we've been working on. So I'm not going to waste your time, and we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, I'm going to share my desktop so you can see where to find all the resources in case you're new. So you just go to www.jellyrollclub.com. It takes you to the main page is where you should go. If you hit home, you scroll down and you can see all of the things that I have on here. There's also a more tab on the side that gives you all the old things like the Ring of Fire, the jewel box, and other things that may not be on the main page. But also, when you go here, you can click on the icons like the mystery stars, and it takes you straight to the page where I have the layout of the quilt that we're working on, the schedule, and I have pictures of the blocks that are coming up. So right now we're going to be working on this little block here called the shooting star. It's a little baby block. And if you click on the handout link at the bottom, it'll say video, it'll take you to the live stream. And then if you see handout 8, it takes you to this handout right here. So say hello, everybody. If you haven't downloaded this, don't worry about it. You can download it later. But if you don't have access to a printer, you could always draw yourself a circle and add the little spikes and make yourself a little spiky little comet. So this shooting star here is 6.5 inches by 6.5. This is a fusible template that I've provided for you, and I'm going to show you 2 different methods. And this is a needle turn or freezer paper template. So that's the difference between this little star that has a seam allowance and the star that has no seam allowance. If you are new to applique, you're going to want to watch the Gnome of the Month series. So if you go to my website, I teach you 12 different ways to applique in the Gnome of the Month. So if you have never appliqued, you're not familiar with it, there's an entire series, and I teach you all of the ins and outs of every type of applique. And every episode has a different technique. So if you want to watch that and learn all about hand piecing, machine piecing, and all kinds of applique that goes with it, you can check out that series. All right, friends, let me show you what we're using today. I'm using freezer paper, just good old Reynolds Wrap freezer paper. And what I do with this is this template right here, which is the freezer paper template. It is the star, but it has a 1/4 inch that's been added all the way around. The other one that you can use is the big template. You can use the same template for this one, and it's for fusible web. So what is fusible web? So fusible web is simply paper that has a release on the back. This is a glue, so it has a paper side and a bumpy side, and that's fusible. So I'm going to show you this method, and I'm going to show you the freezer paper method. The other tools that I'm going to use today is this is a heavy finish regular starch that you can buy at any grocery store. I'm going to be using the lid as my little receptacle, a little tiny paintbrush, and I'm using paper scissors and applique scissors because I don't want to tear up my good applique scissors, so I always have a pair of paper scissors and a pair of applique scissors. Okay? All right, friends, this is all that we need, and we're going to get started. All right, so the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to prepare your fabric. So for the background, you're going to need a 6.5 inch square. If you do not have a 6.5 inch square, you can sew 3 jelly roll strips together, and you're going to press them either open or to one side, and that creates a 6.5 inch square if you have a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So if you have 3 jelly roll strips, you cut them 6.5 inches long and sew them together, it gets you a 6.5 inch square. And if your fabric is a very faint tone on tone like this, you can't even see those lines. So if you don't have a 6.5 inch square, just pull something out of your scrap bin and you're ready. Or you can use a solid background. I'm going to use this 6.5 inch square that I made for one of my stars. You can also just kind of piece it in half. If you notice, this one is just pieced in half. So I have 2 pieced backgrounds I've got over here, and then just another one that's a regular piece. When you sew pieces together for a background, avoid things that have a busy print like this, because you can see right there where those pieces are joined, and so sometimes it creates a distraction. So whenever I'm piecing a background, I try to find fabric that's muted so that you can't tell. I love using tone on tones, and these are batiks, so they're my favorite anyway. All right, the first method I'm going to show you how to do is the fusible method, and for that I'm going to use these 3 strips that I put together. And what I did with the fusible method is I simply took this right here, and I did the paper side and laid it down, and I traced the star that does not have the seam allowance. So you're going to trace right on that line. And what it gives me is a star without the seam allowances, because that's what you need for fusible, and that's the easiest method for those who are new to applique. So I've already done that to save you some time, because I'm showing you 2 methods today. And so if you notice, I just laid that paper and I drew those lines out. I just made little dots. This is the bumpy side, and I drew it on the paper side. Now on the wrong side of the fabric, I'm going to lay this down, and I'm going to avoid having those seams at my points. So I want them away from my points. And I'm going to give it a good hard press with a dry iron, no steam. Whenever you use fusible web, do not starch the fabric on the back side. And I actually avoid starching the fabric on the front side, because sometimes the glue, the fusible interfacing, will not stick if you have starch on your fabric. And then it'll release and it'll make a big mess. So each type of fusible web, I use Pellon 805, that's my favorite, has its own set of instructions. Pellon 805 says to hold a hot dry iron on there for 15 seconds. And I can tell that mine is ready when it gets transparent and you can see through the paper. I'm just going to let that dry for a second, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to cut directly on that drawn line. And you can't see it very much because I did it with Sharpie and it tends to disappear, but that is my fusible one. So I'm going to set this to the side and let it cool, and I'm going to show you how to do the next one. So the second method that I wanted to show you is the freezer paper method. And so this one is, it's got a waxy side and a dull paper side. So I'm just going to take 3 squares, and I'm going to put waxy side down, and waxy side down. And I'm going to take a piece of fabric. This is just a scrap. And this has not been starched, but it has been washed. And I'm going to lay all of this down on top, and then I'm going to press the freezer paper down. Now, you notice that this does not have the seam allowances, the freezer paper, and I'm going to show you why in a minute. So I've just got all of my freezer paper together. I'm just trying to get it to stick, and I'm going to release that. And now all of this is one big pattern, okay? Just like this. I've got 3 papers. They're all ironed together, and that makes that a nice stiff pattern that now will stick to my fabric, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so this one is ready. It has cooled down. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this first one. This is the fusible method. And I'm going to come in, and I'm using my paper scissors. And I'm going to come in and just trim off right on that line. And I'm going to just come around those corners, and I'm going to curve them just a hair. I learned all about shooting stars. I didn't know that shooting stars were just meteors. I must not have been paying attention in science class. Sorry to my high school science teacher who taught us that. But apparently they're just big rocks that heat up in the atmosphere. And they're actually little meteors. A lot of them burn out before they get to the Earth, and so they don't hit us. So that's what little shooting stars are. And so that's what we're working on today, is this little shooting star. How many of you are science nerds and love to get out there at night and watch the stars? I'm always looking for shooting stars. I just think they're pretty. I'm lucky that I live out in the country, and so as long as most people have their lights turned off, then I can see the stars quite well out in the sky. But that's not always true if you live in a city. All right, let's see who's out there. So we have Lucinda. We have a few other people who've joined us. And if you are new to the channel, please let us know where you're from. Also, I have a question at the top. And one of the questions is, which of the stars is your favorite star? And if there's a star that's giving you grief, please let me know the star that's giving you grief, because I'm going to come back and I'm going to do some short form videos just to review the tricky parts of some of the other stars that we've done so far. And this is a skill builder. So if you don't feel like doing one of the stars, don't do it. It's your quilt. You can do whatever you want. All right, so there we have it. My star that's pieced. You can't even tell where I've pieced it. And then I'm just going to take and I'm going to use a pin, and I'm going to score that backing, and I'm going to remove the paper. And so what that does is it leaves that gluey stuff on the back of my star. And this is a temporary adhesive. The more you press this, the more that glue dissolves. And so when you wash a quilt with fusible web in it, over time the fusible web breaks down. So then you have to sew the edges down, because if you don't, over time this applique piece will just peel off and it'll come off of your quilt. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to find a spot. This one has a seam in the middle. This one has seams on the sides. I'm just going to line it up. Make sure that it's relatively centered, and then I'm going to press it with a hot dry iron. Some of my points are spikier and some of them are less spiky, and that's okay. Some of you guys may have those fancy machines, like those scan and cuts. You can try to cut that with this, but I always try to put like freezer paper on the back of my fabric. It makes it easier to cut. But I just use scissors. It's relaxing. All right, so there is one method. This is the fusible method. Then I'm just going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew all the way around. I am going to sew this with bright red thread, just so that you can see it. So I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm just going to come down in one of these spots that's easy to start. So I'm going to come right here, and I'm going to sew about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. You just grab the tails of your thread, you drop the needle down, and then you pull it up. Anytime that I'm starting an applique, I pull my thread up. And then once I move that out of the way, then I'm less likely to get a weird knot. So drop that down like this, hold that thread out of the way, and then sew all the way around with your sewing machine, just like this. Whenever I have a applique piece, make sure that if your sewing machine has a needle down feature, go into that corner and sew that into the corner like this so that it doesn't lift. And so you're getting as close to that corner as possible, and then you're going to sew back down the other edge just like this. And then you're going to come this way. If your machine doesn't have the needle down, just slow down until you get to about a ½ inch away from the end and turn it by hand like this. Turn the hand wheel by hand and just stop right there where you're close to the end of that spike, and then come back this way. And so you don't have to have a needle down position on your sewing machine. It's nice if it has it, but you don't have to have that. It's not required. I like to pivot with the needle down, so if your machine doesn't have it, just push it, the needle straight down and then pivot. It just keeps everything nice and tidy. And so that's it. It's super easy. This is probably one of the easiest stars we're going to get until you get to the darling star. For those of you who are wanting to finish this in time for the holidays, we are going to have all of the stars done by October. And so you'll have plenty of time to quilt this for somebody you love in time for the holidays if you want to give it as a holiday gift. So for those of you who are wondering when the series ends, it ends in October. And if you have any questions about the series or what we're doing, just go ahead and drop that in the chat, okay? Like I said, if you have one of the stars that you have enjoyed, just put that in the chat. Tell me which star you love the most. And if you have one that gave you trouble and you need some help or you want some more information on how to finish it, please let me know. And I will go back and do some mini lessons in a short format video doing some tips and tricks for the other ones. Okay. Now, most people assume that you have to have fancy stitches on your sewing machine to do applique, but you really don't. There's tons of applique quilters out there that literally do just what I'm doing, which is just secure the ends with thread about 1/8 inch away from the edge. Now, I do have to warn you that that little tiny edge, you want to get as close as you can. That little tiny edge will curl up a little bit on you when you wash, which is one of the reasons why I pre-wash my fabrics, is because I don't want to get a lot of shrinkage. And so if you want your appliques to stay pretty and you are new to applique, I always recommend that you wash your fabric that you're going to applique, the fabric that you're going to use here and your background, just because it reduces puckering and shrinkage, and it keeps those appliques looking beautiful after you finish your piece. All right, everybody, we're getting close to the end for this star. Look at this. This is, like I said, a brain break from all the other stars we've been doing. Sometimes you just have to take one more stitch. So always check before you travel too far. And there you have it. Like I said, super easy. Just allow that needle to do the work for you. If you keep it in and then you pivot, just makes it easy peasy. And then I just come back down. Some people asked if I have 2 different quilts in progress, and the answer is yes. I'm making 2 of this Mystery Stars quilt series. I most definitely do have 2 of these in progress. One for me and one for a friend. When you get to the end, right where I started, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to take 1 stitch, and then I'm going to overlap where I started by 2 stitches and then stitch back. And so I'm going to go forward 2 stitches like this, and then I'm going to go backward at least 1 before I take and I break my thread. And I'm going to be careful and pinch it with my finger like this, and carefully use my flywheel to loosen that thread so that I don't tear it up or pucker it right there. And then I'm just going to snip it really close to the edge and snip that. And let's see if I like it, how it looks. And yes, I do. There's no puckering. If you notice, I did not use any interfacing. I did not use anything backing this. It's simply the fusible web and my applique piece that held it all together. No pins required. Nice and flat. For this one, I put starch on the back side of my fabric, not on the front. And this finished up nice. And so that is one of my little stars. This particular piece, if you notice, it had a little wonkiness right there and I didn't like how it looked. So what I did is I stitched in and made it straight as I was stitching. And now I can peel it back and I'm going to trim that. Because you can fix this afterwards too if you want to. So I'm going to heat that up in that corner. And I'm going to pull this up with my needle right there. And I didn't like how that little corner was looking. And then I'm going to come in with my little tiny applique scissors. I'm going to peel that back and I'm just going to trim it. And you can do that after the fact. Yes, you can. I don't recommend it, but you can fix it if you don't like something that looks a little off. And it looked just a little crooked to me. And I may come in and nibble that little corner. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist sometimes. But you can finish this edge with any decorative stitch on your sewing machine. You could do a little tiny zigzag. You can do a satin stitch so that the zigzag goes right barely to the edge. You can also do those little fancy stitches that some of your sewing machines have. My machine is literally straight stitch. It does nothing. And so this is it. And so this is one of my little stars down. Okay, so now let's talk about this one, right? And this particular template, if you notice right here, has the star, but it also has this border. This is for people who are doing needle turn applique. If you are doing the freezer paper method, you will trace this dark line onto your freezer paper just like I did for the fusible. And now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to cut this just barely inside my drawn line. And so I'm going to come in, and this is 3 pieces of freezer paper, and I'm going to come in and trim that. And it's easier if you just come in from the side like this and cut to the middle and then remove that first chunk. Once you have that first chunk out of there, it's easy. Hi Karen, welcome. From Western Kentucky, you're not too far from me. I'm in Central Kentucky. And so now I'm going to just take and I'm going to trim this entire thing. If you want to round those ends, you can. You don't have to. And I'm just going to come in and I'm using my paper scissors to make this little shooting star template using 3 layers of freezer paper, all kind of ironed together. And this is where the fun starch comes in. Here, let me see. All right. Can you guys see my hands? Now that it's daylight savings time on the East Coast, I get some weird daylight. It's almost better when it's dark because then my spotlights work better. When I get all this weird glare sometimes when I'm using daylight and lamps. All right, can you guys see okay? May have to. There it goes. I don't know if you guys can see those. There it. I just have to hold it this way. So you guys can see the lines. I'm cutting just inside my lines. All right. So now that I have this little thing here, you're like, what is she going to do with that? Well, what I'm going to do, and this is a batik, so it doesn't matter, But if this were not a batik, you're going to put it on the wrong side of the fabric. And then you're going to press this down. So you're going to just lay it down here. And I'm going to take and I'm going to press it down with a hot dry iron. This would be the right side of the fabric and the back side would be the wrong. And then you're going to press it from this side. And what I want is for that freezer paper to stick really, really well to this. It's not going to leave residue or glue. And now I'm going to begin the process of pressing this and getting it ready to hand sew onto my background. When I hand sew, I use 100% silk thread, and usually the thread color that I pick matches my fabric, and it's just like a shade lighter. I don't know if you can tell, but this is like a darker red, and this is just like a shade lighter. I don't know if this exposure button lets me lighten it up. I don't know if you can see that. Maybe. But this red is literally just one shade lighter than this right here, and it's 100% silk thread. So when you lay that on there, it literally disappears and you can't see it. All right, and so now I'm going to take my applique scissors and I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut into this, and I'm going to leave just a smidge. I'm going to cut really close to that edge, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And then I'm going to come in over here, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance like this. And I'm going to come in over here. And I'm going to do that to each of the points on this little thing right here, this little star. I'm just going to trim those off. It creates confetti, so I'm going to come in close, but not into the point, and I'm going to leave a little bit on either side, just like this. And so what I'm going to do with this, and this little tail right here, I'm going to trim it like this, kind of rounded, and that will give me a bias edge, so I'll be able to use the starch to come around the corner. And so I'm going to go like this. I'm just going to put a little bit of starch. It's a little bit yellowy, and that's okay. Put a little bit of starch and take my paintbrush. I'm going to put something underneath my woolly mat here so I don't get a bunch of residue. I'm just going to use a piece of linen. It's been folded in half. And I use this as a pressing cloth. And then I'm going to take the starch. Let me shake this starch. It's actually kind of cold. I just bought this the other day at the store. There it goes. Make sure you shake that can. So when I have the starch now in here, I'm going to baste it right along. I'm just going to brush it right along the outside of the paper. Not the inside of the paper, but the outside of the paper. Just outside. And then with any tool, I use some inexpensive dental tools that I have. So these are my favorite little tools. They're just little metal. And the reason I like them is because they're metal. And so if I'm ironing, it won't matter. And so I'm going to take and I'm going to push this over. And this is what I'm going to hold it with. And I'm going to give it a little press. And so what I'm doing is I'm teasing that fabric over so that it kind of curls over, that seam allowance curls over that edge. Here on the end, I'm going to come and I'm going to kind of fold it inward just a hair, like this. And if you want a sharp point, then you can hold all three together like this and push it inward. And you're going to get a nice little point there. You can always do it like this as well. But this is for hand sewing. You can always applique this also by machine. And so once you get this done, you can take a glue stick and glue this down. And you can, once you've basted it, see how I have a seam allowance sticking out right there? I'm going to come in with my little tiny applique scissors, and I'm going to get rid of that seam allowance because I'm going to, later on, I'm going to come in and sew that down. So I'm going to get rid of the extra bulk up at the tip. And when I'm sewing that, I'm going to bring that in just a tad. And I'll be able to take my needle, flip it down, and when I sew it, it'll have that little slightly rounded edge that I was looking for. And I'm going to do this all the way around, and it won't take me long. You'll watch me. All right, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to come in all of these just like I did that one. If you want to leave a slightly bigger seam allowance, you can. I've been doing this for a long time, so I can use a smaller seam allowance. But if you want to leave a slightly bigger seam allowance, you can. And just chop it off. Like I said, about 1/4 of an inch all the way around. Chop. Come in the middle. Come down the sides. And this doesn't take long. Freezer paper method is one of my favorite methods for applique, just because, especially if you're hand appliquing. Some people love that needle turn, but my hands are more arthritic these days, and so the more arthritic your hands get, the harder it is to do some of that needle turn and some of that detailed hand piecing. So there we go. Like I said, you don't have to be perfect. If you cut the seam a little bit too small, it's fine. Come in here, get rid of some of the cardboard. I had an extra bit of freezer paper there anyway. Come on in from the sides all the way around. And this little guy is ready to finish up. And just like that, we have our little star. So now that I'm ready to prep my little star and finish prepping it, I have more starch. I'm just going to come in, and it doesn't take long. This is the kind of stuff that you do while you're watching a nice romantic comedy or some other kind of thing on TV that's kind of brainless, that you know the ending, like all those Hallmark movies. And so you just bring it in here. I'm going to get rid of my excess seam allowance if it overlaps right there. If I have a little bit of an overlap in the seam allowance, then I'm going to come in and I'm going to trim that bulk off out of that point. And batiks are great for this because batiks fray very little. They will fray, but very, very little. And so I'm just going to come in and bring that in. And I'm only starching one little section at a time. You can always lay it back on the other side like this and just kind of lay your iron on it for a second. And you can see those points, and I'm okay with those little points, like I said, because I'm going to fold those down ever so slightly when I'm ready to sew it down, and I will get that perfect little rounded corner that I'm looking for when I'm sewing. And so I'm going to do this all the way around. I'm going to go quickly on this edge. And you're just basting that with a tiny bit of starch, heavy starch. Doesn't take very long. Come in and trim the excess seam allowance that's sticking out. And that just reduces the bulk in there. Same with the other side. And you're just going to keep doing that all the way around. It doesn't take very long. For those of you who are pressed for time, The fusible method is much faster for those of you who love hand piecing and handwork. This is a great relaxing method. And this is an alternative to needle turn. So the freezer paper method is an alternative. There's actually a quilt I want to do, and I'm going to do the freezer paper method, and it has like 1,000 leaves. It's a family tree. But I'm probably going to have to wait until I'm retired to do that. I'm going to move my head over here to the other side because I see that I'm blocking it. I don't want to block my hands with my head. So I moved my head over. All right, same thing. We're just going to take and put a little bit on the end, fold it both ways, push, push, push against that paper. Come in and press from the end. And take this hangover, this little bunny ear, this extra, and just trim it off. That's just an extra seam allowance. And this is it, super fast. Has anyone ever used this method before, where you're using fusible or a piece of cardboard to prep your applique pieces? The freezer paper method is great for larger pieces. It doesn't work well for little tiny pieces, but it works great for circles. If you have a quilt like a Baltimore album that has a lot of like grapes or small circles, it works great for that. Yes, I want to do a family tree quilt, so I will be drafting a family tree. I'm going to be drawing one. It's going to be like on 4 pieces of paper, and I'm going to be making one using shirts. My father passed away last year, for those of you who've been following me, and so I'm going to make the leaves of the tree using my father's shirts, and I'm going to put the names of my family members, my siblings, on there. And so that is a project that is on my horizon, and when I do that, I will share. I have, well, it depends. If I want full retirement, my goal is to do 4 more. But if I retire early, technically, I could go in the next couple of years. But I don't know. I'm still healthy. I'm enjoying my teaching job. My students are wonderful. Schools are challenging, but my students are great. And so as long as I'm healthy and I'm doing okay, I'm going to hang in there. We need teachers. There's such a huge teacher shortage. And so I'm not ready to leave my babies just yet. I teach high schoolers, but I also have middle school assigned to me. So I like them all. I like adolescents. They smell a little weird in the springtime, but other than that, they're fine. This is the time of the year when we have to remind young people to please use plenty of deodorant. It happens to every teacher in middle school in the spring. It's a special little smell, and you guys know what I'm talking about if you've raised children. All right. So now that it's getting there, look, we're getting there. We're going to trim all the excess seam allowances. Get that out of there. And I'm almost to the start. You can see how quickly this goes. And like I said, if you want to do a bigger seam allowance, you can. I'm trying to reduce the bulk of my block, so I did a fairly thin seam allowance, like a 1/4 inch. And then when I have this ready and all of my seams are pressed inward, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to wiggle, just wiggle the inside without distorting it too much. I'm going to wait for it to dry, and I'm going to peel off this template that I've made. And then I'm going to take my little star, and I'm going to flip it over with all of its little seams down, and I'm going to give it a good hard press to make it flat. Make sure all of those seams go down the way I want them to. So wrestle with it a little bit. And then I'm going to take this little star and I'm going to give it a splash of starch. So I'm just going to spritz it like this, a very fine mist, and then I'm going to starch it. And that's just so that it'll hold its shape for me. You can pin it. And all these little things that hang over, I'm going to trim those as I go. So I can just trim that. That's a seam allowance. I'm going to get rid of that so that there's no bulk. And that's just where it sticks out. So I'm going to come in and just trim it off, get rid of that, and that'll be ready to go. And you just trim this and get it all ready. And now I'm ready to start appliquing this little guy. Like I said, you can applique by hand. Works great. You can even applique by machine. So if you wanted to take this over to your machine, you could applique by machine. All right, quick poll. Yeah, middle schoolers definitely smell a little bit weird this time of year. It's just their little bodies changing, their little hormones. Sweet little angels, love those babies. All right, so there's my star, all prepped and ready to go. I'm going to take and I'm going to pin it to my background now. I'm just going to take and put it in the center, making sure that it's at least 1/8 of an inch away. If these are too long, I can come in and prune those, but I want to make sure that I have a 1/4 inch seam all the way around my block. Some people prefer to applique and then trim their block. I'm okay with either way. And so now I'm going to take and I'm just going to pin it into place with little tiny applique pins. And applique pins are different than regular pins because they're tiny and they're short. And so I'm just going to take and I'm going to put little applique pins like this in a few spots, about every other one, just to keep it from wiggling around. I don't want it shifting in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to put a few of these tiny applique pins. Mine have glass heads so that I don't lose them in my sewing room. See, that one's too close, so I'm going to have to come in and prune that. Maybe move that over. And so you're just going to have to center it. Like I said, you may want to trim that a little bit bigger, the background, and then trim it. All right. So now that I have it, and I have it in several little places, just kind of pinned in place so it's not wiggling around. Now I'm ready for the sewing part. And to sew, like I said, if you're going to sew by hand, I use 100 weight silk thread, 100% silk thread, because you can use a single strand and it's very, very strong. And so I have, as I get older, I have the need for glasses, so I'm going to put those on. And I'm going to show you how to do this. So I'm using a very sharp needle. You can use a John James, you can use a longer needle, but I use sharps. And then you're just going to take a length about the length of your forearm. I usually use, and then I double that. So maybe about 20 inches. And I'm going to do a single strand, not double. And so I'm going to lick it. Sorry about that. If that grosses you out, sorry. In the real world, we lick our thread. Usually on TV, they don't lick theirs, but we're licking ours today. And so I'm going to take the end of my thread and I'm going to wrap it around the needle and do a quilter's knot, which is just like 1, 2, 3, 4 wraps. And then I'm going to push it through. And it makes a nice little quilter's knot. And then I'm going to be using single strand of thread. And I'm going to come in from the back. right along that edge where that fabric is creased, and I'm going to sew it down. And I'm going to come in kind of behind the fabric like this and up that little edge again. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm coming in straight from the back of the fabric up like this to that edge, and I'm going to pull. I don't know if you can see that. And when I do, that creates a little tiny stitch along that edge that disappears. And this is why I'm sewing with thread that is the same color. So I'm going to kind of tunnel my needle back there behind it a little bit and bring it just where that fabric is folded along that edge. And one of the things that's helpful is to sew about every 1/8 of an inch. If you want to keep your stitches consistent, you can take and draw on your fingernail a couple of little lines like this. Just do a couple little dots. And I use those dots on the end of my fingernail like this to just use them as reference points so that I can see how far apart my stitches are, and that helps me to keep my stitches consistent. And so I'm going to hold it. I'm going to pinch it like this between my fingers, both fingers pinched, one on the back side, and I'm going to carefully tunnel sideways and bring that up right at that edge. And what I'm trying to do is just make that stitching as invisible as possible. And then I'm going to smooth it and just tug at it. Not pull, because I don't want it to pucker. And then I'm just going to do it like that. And when you notice that, it creates a little teeny tiny stitch that's pretty much invisible. And like I said, you're going to come in from the side, and you're going to come in and you're going to stitch like that. When you get to the end, you're going to stitch down and you're going to tuck with your needle just a hair the tip. So you're going to bring it down like this. You're going to pinch it with your finger and then push it down just barely like this. And then you're going to hold it in place. And when you stitch all the way up to that edge, you're going to want to stitch that tip, and that's what will give you that nice tip. So let me get to the end so you can see that. Let me go a little bit faster here. And like I said, don't pull your thread too tight, because if you pull your thread too tight, then you're going to get a puckery mess, and that's not the goal of this. Some people love slow sewing. I don't know. I'm split 50-50. Sometimes I like slow sewing with my fingers. Sometimes I just let my machine do it. If you wanted to sew this down with a decorative stitch on your sewing machine, you most certainly could. Instead of doing what I'm doing, you could just take it over to your machine and do a decorative stitch if you wanted to do that. I could certainly get tired of this and then decide to go over to my sewing machine and do that as well. All right, so now I'm at the end. I'm about here, and don't tangle your thread. I just tangled it. So if you tangle your thread, you're just going to have to pull those up like this carefully and untangle it with the needle as you go till you get that to the end. There we go. Now it's nice and smooth. So when I get to the end, I'm about 1/8 of an inch from the end. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pinch it with my needle, just the tip. I'm going to curl it back just a hair. I'm going to grab it with my finger and make sure that all of that is tucked under. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to sew just underneath the piece and come up where my nail is. And I'm going to hold it down and sew it into place. And then right here at that tip, I'm going to sew down behind that tip. And I'm anchoring that point. So I'm going straight up there and I'm going to anchor that point. Now that I've anchored that point, I'm going to smooth it with my finger. I'm going to give it a slight tug from the back. And then I'm going to come in right where I want that to curve. And I'm going to tuck that under. So I'm going to come in from the back, tuck that under, and then go straight back down that point. And the reason I'm doing that is to curl that down and to force it back down. See it? By doing it that way, I'm forcing that little tip to go under. And so that's always kind of tricky, okay? And so if you've never played with it, you can. And you just take and make sure that all of your threads are tucked under, that there's nothing sticking out, and that makes that nice little, tiny little star point, just like that. And if your star tip is still kind of floating, you can come in from here and do another little tiny stitch from the back, push it downward, and making sure that that tip is all going in. I'm pushing my fabric under, just like this, nice and tight. And then I'm going behind the applique piece. I'm holding it with my finger, going behind the applique piece, and I'm pushing that corner, and I give it another stitch. And just by making sure that this corner is anchored, it'll keep it from lifting. It'll make sure that all of my little ends and nubs are down there. And that's looking really, really good. And now that I'm done with that side, I can come back the other way and do just like I did before. Bring my needle out through that little crease from the back. So I'm coming from the back out to that little crease. And voila, that's how I do it. Now, if I didn't want to spend a bunch of time doing it by hand, I could also come over here to my machine and I could literally just stitch it down with my machine. And so I could just come over here, and this is where these little dental tools come in handy. They have these little dental tools. I paid like $5 or $6 for them. And they have all of these little hooks like this, and they have these little pins. And I love to use these when I'm sewing stuff, especially something with a little sharp edge, and I can just take and turn these. So I am like other people on here. I don't have the patience for all this lovely hand sewing. If you love it, do it. But I'm going to take this over to the machine, and I'm going to show you how to do this really, really fast. So I'm going to take it over to my machine. And just like before, guess what? We're going to come in here and we're going to start sewing. And so I'm going to sew like this, about a 1/16 of an inch away, right along that edge. Come to the point, come around back where I just stitched, and you're stitching right inside that fold line. You're going to come over here and you're going to stop, and you're going to come around the mountain. All right, and you're going to just come over here, and I'm going to just use my fingers to make sure that that's laying flat. Don't stretch it. And then when I get close to that tip, I'm going to want to use a big needle like this, like a doll needle, or the tip of my thing, to kind of hold that down and put it into place like this. This is where those dental tools are super handy, but I often use like a big fat embroidery needle, a pin, or my handy dandy little tools, like kind of hold it into place and then pinch it. And then when I come in, I pull that, and then it sews it right in place. Take my hand wheel, make sure that it's down, and then I rotate that, and I just come back down the other side. These are great for holding these little bits. So dental tools are one of my favorite cheap sewing hack. Like I said, I paid like $5.99 for my dental tools. And you don't need a full set like I have. And look at that. And you're just coming down. You're going to pinch it just like I did the other ones. Pinch it downward. If it doesn't want to lay flat because you've starched it, you can always lick the tip of your finger and roll that tip back and it'll hold. So yes, more licking. Right? And then you're just going to hold it just like that with the dental tool. You can use a purple thingy, a stiletto, whatever you've got that has a nice sharp point, and I'm going to hold it and then sew. And then right before I get there, I'm going to pull that away. Do not sew your finger or the purple thingy when you're doing this. Dangerous. And then you're coming around and you're just going to sew, sew, sew. Just like that. Super easy. Like I said, lick your finger, roll that tip back because it has a tiny bit of starch. And then you can come around the mountain with your purple thingy or your tool or your stiletto, whatever it is that you use to hold that. And then you come around. So yeah, those of you who love handwork, kudos to you. There's nothing more amazing than beautiful applique, Baltimore albums, and all those delightful little things. But me, I'm a full-time working granny / mommy. And so I've got to, every moment that I've got to use it towards maximum benefit. All right. Here we go. Like I said, of these two methods, which ones do you prefer, the freezer paper or the fusible? I'm a fan of the fusible, but it's whatever floats your boat. Here we go. Look at this. I'm almost done. I would have been here for 3 hours hand sewing this, or 30 minutes hand piecing it, right? It takes a long time to hand sew. For those of you who are hand sewers, how long does it take you typically to do a block? You can put that in the chat if you want to let me know. If you're watching it on replay, you can just put in the comments, right? Those of you who are watching on replay. All right, let me see. Ooh, so close. So close, right? 2 more little tips right here. Like I said, just lick your finger, tuck that little tiny baby downward. Hold it with the little dental tool in place, just tuck it under. Come around. And look at how quickly you can machine stitch that. Like I said, if you want to use a fancy decorative stitch and your machine has those, feel free to take and put a really fancy decorative stitch from your machine and even do a contrasting thread like a metallic thread. That would be great. All right, so now that I have the last bit, it's going down, 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 down. We're in the home stretch, people. I just need one more turn. And just like before, where I started, I'm going to come forward 2 stitches and back 2 stitches. And then I'm going to cut my thread. All right, so that part is finished. Let me show you. Ta-da! I'm going to take those little pins out of there. And this is where I will give it a good press, and I always press from the back. See what kind of a mess I made back here. Not too bad. All right. There's a little bit of the hand stitching I did. I'm going to give it a little spritz of starch from the back to get rid of any fullness or puckeriness that I have. But this one actually turned out not bad. And now I can do some from the front. And I always iron my applique from the back or press it from the back. All right, so there we have it, friends. There's the little star. If you don't like how that little point turned out like I don't, I may unpick it. I don't know. I may just leave it alone. But there's the little star. You've got two methods for making this block. You can either fuse it down and stitch it fancy, or you can do freezer paper method like this and give it a turned edge so that you don't get any fraying. And there you have it, friends. That's it. If you enjoyed this mini lesson on using fusibles and doing faux turned applique, give this video a thumbs up. Share it with your friends so that they can come here and make quilt blocks with us. But here are mine. One blue, one red. Let me see. Got little pieces of thread. There we go. All right, friends, it is 7:01, so I was able to do 2 blocks in 1 hour, so it's not too bad. All right, everybody, you guys have a great week. Next weekend is Easter, so happy Easter to everyone. I will not be here on April the 7th because I will be traveling. As I said, it's the 1-year anniversary of my father's passing, so we're going to be spending time with family. But I will have a pre-recorded video on April the 7th on making the Peaky and Spike star. And I'm going to use 2 different methods, but it's going to be a pre-recorded video, and it'll drop at 6 o'clock like the live streams. So just watch for it at 6 o'clock, and it'll go bloop, it'll pop up, and it says, Jelly Roll Club has a new video. And you'll get to watch it then. All right, everybody, have a wonderful work week if you work. Otherwise, I will see you guys later. Watch for a new video on April the 7th, and you guys have a wonderful, wonderful Easter. All right, everybody, bye-bye.